have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
This is Multipolarity, charting the rise of the new multipolar world order. Coming up this week,
the US State Department advised its citizens in northern Mexico to shelter in place, as the cartels took their reprisals following a major Mexican security forces operation against gang kingpin El Mencho, and then another called El Tuli. It's all LOL until you realize that this is just the start. By targeting the cartels, the US has poked a hornet's nest, and the hornets are on cocaine.
Meanwhile, have you paid a US steel tariff in recent months? Was it over 30%? If so, you could be due a refund. Just dial 1-800-WHITE-HOUSE to see if you may be eligible. The Supreme Court acknowledged that sorting out the tariff strikedown could be a complete mess. But after the mess, the reckoning. Deep down, this is a story about the US balance of payments.
Finally, Christine Lagarde is stepping down from the ECB. Emmanuel Macron's Napoleonic pincer movement is that this frees the way for Lagarde Presidential Run and stops a national rally government from appointing its own bank governor in 2028. But with these kinds of cynical machinations now effectively running the European elite, the entire centrist establishment may be embarking on its Russia campaign.
All of this coming up for premium subscribers. That's right, it's a premium week. If you're not a premium subscriber, you can sign up to our new Metternich tier on Patreon for $8, pounds, or euros a month. For clarity, we should point out that founder subscribers still on the old Palmerston tier will remain at $5 a month. For everyone else, try it once, you won't regret it, and you can cancel at any time. Oh, and if you like audio-visual multipolarity, you can always check us out on Substack, where we are expanding our output with a weekly multipolarity briefing every Tuesday, supplemented with the occasional fantastic article of analysis.
But first, El Dumbo.
This week, violence has erupted in Mexico. The Mexican government engaged in what appears to have been a highly successful assassination mission against one of the cartels. Involved the assassination or murder or killing of Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, and I'm very sorry for the pronunciation of that. Let's from now on call him by the name he's widely known by, El Mencho. He was the leader of the Jalisco New Generation cartel, which was the cartel that was reportedly central to fentanyl trafficking into the United States. Now, within a matter of hours of news of the success of the hit, the government hit on El Mencho breaking, the cartel coordinated an absolutely massive and widespread retaliation, and that included highway blockades, burning vehicles, an attack on the main airport. There were some explosions, there were attacks on security forces, on police. There was prison unrest. I saw gunmen marauding through streets and through airports. It actually looked pretty frightening to be there, given this unrest. And I think the importance of this is not just the standard kind of cartel versus government violence that sometimes erupts in Mexico or sometimes erupts around the world, where you get these organized criminal groups or perhaps political insurgent groups in developing countries, and occasionally the government takes them on or has some kind of success and violence erupts. I think this is much more important than that. We on Multipolarity have covered for a long time the increasing tensions between Washington and Mexico City on a range of issues. Now, those issues are as various as the way that Mexico is trying to reform its judiciary, some of the confrontations between U.S. corporations and the Mexicans in terms of pro-worker or pro-ordinary person regulation that the Mexicans are trying to pass. But a lot of it centers on the drug problems, which are undeniably huge in the US, and especially fentanyl. I actually think in some ways the human cost of the drug problem and opiates problem in the US is actually underappreciated somehow. I mean, we see a lot of this, and it gets regularly covered in the news, but I think when you actually drill down and think about all of the wasted lives, the violence, the crime, the deleterious effect on society in general, it really shouldn't be underestimated. And of course the Americans, especially on the Republican side, have been putting pressure on the Mexicans to handle the cartels and really get a grip on the cartels for a long time and really help stop this trade. But the process of doing all of that is going to be extraordinarily destabilizing. And it's one thing to engage in a kind of counter-terrorism or counter-insurgency war in somewhere like Somalia or Afghanistan or Libya or Syria or wherever, somewhere far away from American shores. But Mexico is right on the border. And if Mexico gets destabilized, so America does as well. As I say, it's right on the border. Mexico is America, believe it or not, Mexico is America's number one trading partner. So their economies are extremely tightly linked. There is a kind of hinterland between the two countries inside US territory, like the extraordinarily high levels of migration that have gone on from south to north over the decades have created a kind of a social and cultural and ethnic hinterland that's inside US territory between Mexico and the US. And for all of these reasons, if Mexico itself gets destabilized, then so will, to a certain degree, the US. It won't be possible to ring fence it, to contain it within Mexico itself. There is also a broader issue here, and I have said this myself a few times, that, of course, US global power and the US ability to project power is due to the huge size of its economy and the unique strategic depth and variety of its economy. That is, of course, true. That gives it the money and the technology and the human resources to create an extraordinarily powerful military. However, it is also that, like, the ability to, or the fact that the US is so powerful is also, at least in part, due to the fact that it has such comprehensive regional hegemony. And that region is quiescent. The fact that it has Mexico and Canada, two countries which are far weaker than the US on its north and south borders, and these two enormous oceans surrounding it, contrasts it very strongly with, say, more local powers like, say, China, which has, Japan and Russia and the Philippines and Vietnam on its, right on its borders, or Russia itself, which has China and Turkey and potentially Germany as well throughout history, and so on and so forth. The US has a very different situation, and that allows it to, that means that it doesn't have to have an enormous standing continental army. It means that it doesn't have to concentrate many resources, economic, financial, diplomatic, or intelligence on its local neighborhood. It can turn almost all of its energy outward. And if Mexico destabilizes, and if this is a kind of a hint of what will happen if the US or the US and Mexico go out on an all-out war against the cartels, then Mexico will destabilize, at least in the short term. And if that happens, then the conditions that the US has enjoyed of a quiescent neighborhood will very rapidly disappear. And there'll be all kinds of immediate political and strategic fallout from that. And I think this is a little taste or a little hint of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of embarrassing for the Trump administration, it must be said. I mean, obviously Trump's got elected on the idea of closing the border. And I think, euphemistically, that also means making sure there isn't wars on the border or close to the border. Of course, this has nothing to do with the United States per se, apart from, the drug demand coming from the United States. So in that sense, it does have something to do with the United States. But it was a Mexican government operation, and by all accounts, it was quite a successful American government. Gosh, this is awkward. You're at the paywall. This can only mean you don't pay for your multipolarity. Well, as you know, chicks hate a skinflint. Please, sir, before you go any further, I'm going to have to ask you to step to one side. Go on Patreon, click subscribe, and rejoin the line. Please, sir, no one wants a scene. These guys were definitely better equipped than the average Taliban was in Afghanistan against the US military, so it was pretty serious. I mean, it was nothing that could, hold part of a city against an actual military force, but it could cause chaos.